So the first 26 acres were purchased by 6 gentlemen who just felt that, the county needed a proper burial space. They realized that with movement because of the railroad coming in and being built, that nobody wanted to bury grandma on their homestead anymore, because what if they moved, right? You needed like a proper burial space. Some of it was old Jonestown property, which was an old African-American settlement, one of the first towns. And parts of the cemetery and the 408 kind of did away with that.
Back in 1880, the city of Orlando did not have an official place to bury any of its dead, until a group of people came around and privately funded the purchase of 26 acres of land where I'm standing now. This is the original part of the cemetery. It's now called the Greenwood Cemetery. It was added onto in the early 1900s and is now 86 acres of cemetery land. There will always be a cemetery. It's maintained by the city of Orlando, and they do a pretty good job of it, I must say. It's pretty well taken care of. There's some tree limbs down and such, but not very much. It's a nice cemetery to walk through, and I've seen a lot of people riding their bikes, lots of driving space. Very historical part of Orlando. When I first came in, the main entrance, where the main entrance is now, I stopped at the office and had a really nice conversation with the gal there that showed me the map and told me a lot of interesting history about the place, including this main entrance behind me that used to be the main entrance when it was first a cemetery back in the 1800s and early 1900s. When it expanded, they moved the main entrance to a different place, but you can plainly see here where people used to come in and out. It's now, certainly the oldest part of the cemetery. There's some really unique graves here that I wanted to show you. This is an interesting grave. Don't see that too often. Died in 1946. An old one from 1920. It's a nice headstone. I see a lot in this first area from the 1920s and 30s, some from the 40s, but it gets older than that. And I want to show you some really special ones. I'm going to be walking around section A. We were just right here at the old main entrance. This grave marker that looks like an old rotted fence post is one of the city of Orlando's very first grave markers ever. It's very old. Back in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, right around 10 years after the cemetery was formed, there was a brush fire that came through and burnt down the grave markers that were here, or most of them. There's only a few of those left. They were all made of wood, like this one right behind me here. You see that this one is unusual because it's got the person who was buried there and their birth year and their date of death. This was Elizabeth Bazmore. She was born in 1823, died in 1890. Right around the time that this cemetery was formed. There's one that has gone missing. If you're looking for these, it's in section A, right here by this big old tree. A lot of old grave markers here. Here's the grave of Leon Bass. He owned a French laundry, corner of Orange and Robinson. He ended up selling that later on in life. He was a New York Times music critic, sold his laundry business to teach French, got hit by a car, and died. Here he lays to rest. Sexton Johnson died April 5th, 1926. Sexton here was superintendent of Orlando City Schools for 5 years until he moved to Tampa, where he drove his car off of an embankment on accident and drowned in 2 feet of water. On the same day, his brother died in Jacksonville after he fell off of a ship. They both drowned on the same day. This is unusual to see the cause of death written on the headstone. Both of them drowned. If you're from the Orlando area, you will recognize a lot of the names on the headstones in the cemetery. There's names like Lou from Lou Gardens, Bumby from Bumby Avenue. 10 mayors are buried here. There's a senator, a famous baseball player, too. Several people of note are buried here. All of the people here are of note, but names you might recognize if you're especially from the area. I told one of my friends that I was coming out here today, and she sent me a link that was very helpful. It's a Google map with grave sites and a little history about each person. Not each single person in here, but a lot of people of note are listed there. It's not completely accurate though, so I've been looking for this gal that owned the first kiln in Florida for a while. I can't find it. Mayor Eugene Goodman Duckworth. He owned the building at 24 South Orange Avenue that was Ivy's department store. It had the first elevator in the city. He liked the department stores, but he didn't like the beer joints. He tried to shut them down while he was mayor from 1920 to 1924. He died in 1959 and was laid to rest right here. When I was researching this cemetery, I just Googled it, and I'm always looking for different articles and things like that. And I came across a video that my friend made, Ryan. His channel is called Explorin' Ryan. I'll put a link to that up above. He gave a great story in that video about Mr. Weeks, right here behind me. I won't tell the story, I'll let him tell it to you, but this is a really interesting situation that the guy got himself into and kind of got himself out of. You have to go check out Ryan's video and watch that. But this is one of the ones you probably want to check out if you come visit the cemetery. Due to a real estate deal gone bad, he got his vengeance eventually. Wandering around looking for a certain monument, and I see this historical marker. This is about the Epps and Shine families, specifically Francis Wales Epps. He was the grandson of Thomas Jefferson. In fact, he lived with Thomas Jefferson for a good period of time, then moved to Tallahassee and then retired here to Orlando. His home was called Pine Hill. It was on Lake Pine Lock. It was pretty nearby here. He was a citrus farmer in his retirement years. Sounds like a nice way to go. Old Johnny Reb. Back in 2017, old Johnny Reb here spent his last days on display at Lake Eola Park, right downtown Orlando. Residents in 2017 decided it was just too racist to have that thing on display anywhere in the city, but Mayor Buddy Dyer made sure that it was still surviving, and he put it right here in the cemetery for people to enjoy if they so wish. It is a part of our history, and here it is. Surrounding Johnny Reb are some of the Confederate soldiers that fought in the Civil War from Orange County. Gaston Holcomb Edwards served as a surgeon in the Collin Hospital in the Panama Canal Zone before practicing medicine here in Orlando. Edwards, his partner, and their staff of 11 doctors used part of the EON as their medical clinic. The city named a park after him on Lake Ivanhoe in Ivanhoe Village. This is sturdy metal here, copperized, looks like. I wonder how that happened. I've driven all the way to the back of the cemetery, past so many graves and I'm sure stories of interesting things that happened all around Orlando and the world. But here in this part of the cemetery is really special. This was considered a community called Jonestown. A long time back in 1880, the same time that the cemetery was formed, Jonestown was formed. It was the first black community in all of Orange County. And it eventually got bulldozed over many years later, I believe sometime mid-century, mid-1900s, got bulldozed over to make room for white housing. It was right around the height of serious racial tension in the area at that time. A lot of bad things happened, as I said, in this area, and this is kind of a result of part of that. There's a freeway, the 408 freeway is right next to us here. So the building of that and the expansion of the cemetery after the white housing went defunct, then this turned into the cemetery part that it is. I'm not clear why the white housing disappeared and how the cemetery procured all this land, but here we are. I believe it's back in this part of the cemetery that the victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting a couple years back are buried here, and also victims of a massacre that happened in Ocoee. It's a terrible story, completely racially related, but those victims are buried here as well. So it's a nice thing in the city to do, to offer those spaces. I'm not sure if they were all donated. I think that they were. I'm not clear on that, but this is where they are buried. I'm really enjoying walking around old Jonestown. This is a pretty historical part of our city. And not only am I enjoying the history and trying to find a couple specific graves, in this same section is where Harry P. Lew is buried. And if you're from the area, you probably have heard of Lew Gardens. Well, that's him. He and his family are buried right over here. I had a hard time finding it, but I'm enjoying just walking around, thinking about what the town looked like here, and how old this tree is behind me. I'm sure that was here when Jonestown existed, where the houses were and what people are doing. Just enjoying the day, thinking about what life must have been like in old Orlando. Now there's a cool gravestone, huh? Wilson. Well, John and Mary share the same headstone, and there the two of them are. They're on the boat. I know exactly what they were into. They're into boating and fishing. There's Mary just hanging out in the front, doing the Mary things. And there's old John. See, they got some grapevines there. They must have been into wine. What do you think? They're into wine. But they have this nice gravesite dedicated by their daughters. Well, John and Mary, it'll be hard not to remember you with a cool gravestone like that. There's one more place that I want to check out before we leave the cemetery today. Some say that the Greenwood Cemetery is haunted, specifically around this mausoleum. It's the final resting place of James Wally Wilmot. He sailed a sailboat around the world 9 times before he settled here in Orlando and got into the citrus industry, retired here. He also discovered phosphate in Polk County. But many say that right on the outsides of this mausoleum, in the dusk hours as we are in, stands sometimes a Confederate soldier, looking very confused, looking out off into the distance. It is a nice view. From right here, off into the distance, you can see downtown Orlando buildings. Very close to downtown. There's also stories of shadow people running through the cemetery at dusk and at nighttime. There's no specific story that goes along with that. It's just that people have these sightings, and apparently they come out of the edges of the cemetery and run around at nighttime. Maybe there could be some activity out here, but I typically find cemeteries to be places of peaceful experiences. With the help of my friend Ryan and his video that I saw this morning, and this really neat interactive Google map that tells you the history of many of the graves here, I was able to tell you some of these stories today. If you want to see more of that, I'll put a link to the interactive map that I found in the description below, and a link to Ryan's channel. I believe it's episode 81 or 82, 87, somewhere in there. You can go check that out and learn a lot more than what I told you today. Rest assured that this will not be the last time that we adventure into this cemetery. There's so many more people and stories. I just barely scratched the surface. It's a really beautiful place to be. Thanks for joining me today, friends, at the oldest cemetery in Orlando, one of the most historical locations in the city. Beautiful. There's so much history here. We will be back to visit this place again and find out more stories from others that have gone before us. Pay our respects. I appreciate you joining me today, friends. I'll see you in the next video.